The story begins with a grand ceremonial gathering inside a hall filled with people. Amidst the celebration, Recap, the second prince of the kingdom of Zain, peacefully receives his coming-of-age ceremony, surrounded by his family and fiancée. A blend of satisfaction and nervousness fills his expression. It was meant to be the day Recap took his first step toward a bright and promising future, yet he was robbed of everything. 1 month before this ceremony, Martina, Recap's fiancée and the daughter of the kingdom's prime minister, sat quietly on a bench, lost in thought about what kind of adult Recap wanted to become. Recap found himself wondering why this sudden topic came suddenly. Martina mocked that it wasn't sudden at all. After all, he would officially become an adult next month. As Recap admitted that when thinking about his future, he wanted to do something meaningful for his kingdom, perhaps even work to support his brother. Martina imagined for a moment that he would say something different, maybe that he wanted to become an adventurer. That's what she had expected. But Recap looked puzzled and asked what kind of impression she had of him. He might not have been the best at studying, but his mind was already made up. He would become a knight who defends the kingdom from its enemies. His eyes gleamed with conviction. As a prince born in the kingdom of Zain, he would fulfill his duty as royalty. Martina felt her heart warm. A knight who protects the kingdom. It was such a wonderful dream, one that suited him perfectly. Her cheeks turned red as she shyly asked if he would also protect her. Kneeling before her, Recap promised that he would give up anything to defend both the kingdom and her. The two of them looked deeply in love. Soon after, Recap's brother appeared and mocked him for telling an interesting story to Martina. He was Granard Zain, the first prince of the kingdom of Zain. Recap greeted his older brother warmly. Granard teased him, saying he must be worried about his little brother feeling anxious before the upcoming succession ceremony, the rite of succession. Holy Sword Danleaf, a sacred blade passed down since the time of the very first king. Legend has it that whoever draws this sword from its resting place shall become the next ruler. Yet for hundreds of years, not a single person has ever been able to pull it out. Now, all that it stands for is for the coming-of-age ceremony that is grasped by royals to confirm their resolution. Recap appeared excited. At almost 13 years old, once the ceremony ended, he would finally be recognized as an independent man. Granard, on the other hand, remained calm, his earlier worries proving unnecessary. Out of brotherly concern, he told Recap that he had high hopes for his future. Recap smiled confidently, declaring that he would become the mightiest knight of them all, the most famous hero in history. With pride and energy in his voice, he vowed to protect both Granard and Tina. Recap pulled out the sword so easily, holding his royal sword tightly. His eyes shone with unshakable belief that he would guard the kingdom no matter what. In the next moment, Granard's expression turned to shock. Onlookers echoed from behind. Someone shouted that Recap had drawn the holy sword. Another man questioned what that could possibly mean, insisting that no one was supposed to be able to pull it out. Recap himself was frozen in disbelief. How had he done it? It made no sense. Granard yelled in confusion, demanding to know how Recap could have pulled the sword free. Grabbing his brother by the shoulders, he shook him in denial, but Recap could only stand speechless. He had no answer. Fury surged within Granard. He couldn't accept it. He had dedicated his entire life to the kingdom, supported it with everything he had, and yet he was not chosen. It felt impossible, unacceptable. Overcome by anger, Granard snatched the royal sword from Recap's hands, but the weapon instantly rejected him, repelling his energy and flying from his grasp. The hall fell silent. Whispers filled the air as nobles and knights discussed the unbelievable turn of events. The holy sword had chosen Recap over the rightful successor to the first king. That could only mean one thing. Recap was deemed more suitable for the crown. Agitated, Granard shouted in frustration, his composure slipping. Suddenly, Lockwood, Prime Minister, approached him calmly, urging restraint. He reminded Granard that they were in public, surrounded by watchful eyes, and promised they would deal with the matter later. Granard turned around with a cold expression and declared that the succession ceremony was now concluded. He forbade everyone present from ever speaking of what they had witnessed. It was an order from the acting king, he warned. Anyone who disobeyed would face severe punishment. Meanwhile, Recap stood in silence, lost in thought. Onlooker questioned why was all of this happening when the king still lay bedridden. There is going to be a succession war in the future. While going back, Recap, hoping to speak with his brother, but Granard, holding back his emotions, told him to return to his quarters and rest. He would summon Recap later. Confused, Recap tried to protest, but Granard's composure snapped. He shouted at his younger brother to leave immediately, to get out of his sight. Grenard wasn't the one chosen by the Holy Sword. The weight of that rejection pressed heavily on his heart as he questioned what he lacked. Outside the castle, they had shackled Raedrel in handcuffs. Raedrel shouted in confusion what was the meaning of all this. The Prime Minister urged him to remain patient, saying that he had only been assigned to his own territory for now, and that he should rest and enjoy the journey ahead in his carriage. But the story took a darker turn. Raedrel was treated as if he were a criminal. Basil Garst, the kingdom's general, assured him that he wasn't to blame, but that this was a necessary step for the kingdom's governance. Lockwood calmly explained that once Grenard ascended the throne, the kingdom would stabilize and Raedrel would eventually be allowed to return to the royal capital. Both men urged Raedrel to understand Grenard's decision, but their words only fueled the fire within him. As Raedrel's anger grew, his chained hands trembled violently before he slammed them down with immense force. Lockwood's eyes widened in realization. The Holy Sword's blessing had amplified Raedrel's strength. His body now overflowed with miasma-infused magic that began to distort the air around him. Lockwood explained that this uncontrollable surge of power could no longer be contained. Since Raedrel couldn't control the Holy Sword's influence, there was no other choice but to suppress it using a demon seal. Hearing that, Raedrel looked confused, unable to process what was happening. Lockwood continued solemnly, saying that though he never thought such a thing could occur, the idea that Raedrel himself might one day bare his fangs against the kingdom. Raedrel's heart was in chaos as he shouted, almost as if he would threaten his own brother with the power of Danleaf, yet deep down he knew he could never do such a thing. He had sworn to become a knight who would serve and protect the kingdom, with or without the Holy Sword, and there was no lie in that oath. Calling out desperately to his brother, he believed that his brother would surely understand. However, both Lockwood and Basil were already irritated. Lockwood declared that the decision had been made. He added that it was all under the orders of His Highness, Lord Grenard. Raedrel's face fell in disbelief. He refused to accept it, convinced that this was a lie. Slowly his strength gave way, and he dropped to his knees in denial. At that moment, Martina appeared. Her expression was filled with sorrow. Raedrel looked up at her, declaring that the situation was absurd and begging her to trust him. But instead, Martina quietly asked him to take care of himself on his journey and wished him a safe trip. Raedrel could only stare at her in confusion and mistrust. He was speechless, but Martina continued softly, saying that the next time they meet, she would love to hear about his adventures. Raedrel thought she completely failed to understand him. Martina interrupted his thoughts and introduced herself. Martina Marcel, daughter of the Prime Minister who governed the land. She told him she could also be called Taina, but that name was meant to be spoken only by her betrothed. Raedrel insisted that it had nothing to do with what he wanted to discuss, but Martina reminded him that he might have used that name before, and warned that he should not anymore. Her words carried a quiet threat. She told him that everything changed the moment he pulled out the Holy Sword. Raedrel stood frozen, tangled in his emotions. Martina asked if he still didn't understand, that for the stability of the kingdom, personal feelings had no place. That was how she had been raised. If he stayed in the royal capital, she said, the kingdom would fall into chaos, and the people would suffer, something he would never want. Still, Raedrel refused to accept it. His mind drifted back to his vow, the promise to become a knight who could support his brother, a hero who would protect the people from demons and enemies, no matter the sacrifice. Martina reminded him that he had once promised to protect her and to protect the country. With a faint smile, she said it was wonderful, the sacrifices he was willing to make for the kingdom. Now his dream could finally come true. Isn't that right? She asked gently. Raedrel trembled with distress. Turning to her father, Martina said she'd adored Raedrel, but only because it was for the good of the kingdom. In her heart, she thought it was truly unfortunate that things had turned out this way. Soon after, Raedrel was again on his knees. Martina stood before him and said there was no longer any reason to remain engaged. Her fiancé, Raedrel Zane, no longer existed. The words shattered him. To him, Tina had been precious, but to her, he was nothing. She had stayed by his side only for a purpose. Martina, too, looked sorrowful. She bowed and asked softly if he was unwell, for he looked pale and weak. Raedrel cried out, demanding what the point was of her concern after all that she had said. Conflicted and shaken, he turned away, refusing to look at her. How could she seem so calm, so unchanged after everything? Martina, still puzzled, wondered why he was in such a rush and what had gone wrong. Raedrel, unable to bear it any longer, Raedrel ran and jumped into the carriage and broke down in tears of disbelief. Moments later, Lockwood stood outside, waving farewell. He wished Raedrol good health and ordered the carriage to depart. As it rolled away, Raedrol looked through the window. He saw his brother. He started shouting loudly. He believed there must have been some mistake, that his brother would never truly abandon him. That hope, however, existed only in his thoughts. His brother, too, was troubled and distant. The bond they once shared was no longer the same. 5 years had passed since then. Raedrol was fighting with some monsters in the forest. A pack of wild dogs charged at him, but he remained fearless, standing firm and alone against the oncoming threat. He stepped down from his horse and removed his cape. These hounds had been plaguing his domain for quite some time, and now they should be ready for what was about to come. The blade pulsed with magic as he invoked his spell Dragon Tail. The ground trembled as he drove them back, cutting through the wild hounds. 2 of the hounds fell instantly, wounded beyond saving, yet more continued to rush in. His sword showed no mercy, its dark power refusing to rest. The battle intensified as he struck again and again until the last of the hounds could no longer continue at his feet. Still, he wasn't satisfied. He never allowed any of them to escape. Looking down at the bodies, he warned coldly that none of them would ever return home again. Just then, a man came from behind. He was Zaphis, a seasoned adventurer from the pioneer town. Zaphis greeted him casually. Raedrol asked whether things were finished on his end, and Zaphis nodded, impressed that one man had taken care of it all alone. Raedrol brushed it off, saying it was nothing special. Zaphis laughed, teasing that the words sounded funny coming from someone who used to cry so easily. Raedrol's brow twitched in irritation at being called soft-hearted again. Zaphis went on, recalling the first time they had met, the young boy who had been sent to him years ago. Zaphis mocked Raedrol, remarking that it was bold coming from someone who used to tear up so easily. The jab instantly irritated Raedrol, who hated being labeled that way. Zaphis teased further, saying that if he remembered correctly, when Raedrol first came there, he truly was one. Hearing that, Raedrol got angry for remembering those early days. Zaphis recalled that when he first saw that kid being sent to him, he didn't know what to expect. As Raedrol thought back, he realized it was probably their lack of tact that had rubbed off on him. Zaphis believed that it couldn't be helped. After all, Raedrol had come from the royal capital, a place that had offered no real support to their struggling town, only to suddenly send a young lord to oversee it. Naturally, the people weren't happy. Still, Zaphis admitted that Raedrol was lucky to have been just a kid back then. Yet, even as a child, Raedrol wasn't the type to give up or rot away. Zaphis remembered being surprised when that same boy came storming into his room one day, demanding a lesson in fighting. From that point on, Zaphis began training him, finding the royal boy both amusing and unexpectedly determined, worth teaching. Raedrol joked that Zaphis had treated it as a hobby, since he kept beating him senseless during training. But Zaphis knew that those harsh lessons were what made Raedrol stronger, and those around them began to recognize Raedrol's growth. Zaphis spoke proudly, saying that the town had grown and that Raedrol was now a respectable lord, in both name and reality. Raedrol interrupted him mid-sentence, cutting off his gross exaggerations, but assured him that the town would do just fine without him. Zaphis was left speechless, realizing he couldn't argue with that. Getting serious, Raedrol advised Zaphis that if he ever wanted to retire, he was free to do so. Zaphis laughed it off, calling him silly, insisting he was still strong and full of energy. But Raedrol revealed that when that day eventually came, he planned to take Zaphis's place. The remark shocked Zaphis. Yet Raedrol spoke with confidence. He would protect him, the town, and everything here, because this place had become his home. Zaphis smirked, recognizing just how much the once little brat had grown. Raedrol then changed the subject, asking what was going on to suddenly bring back so many old memories. Zaphis grinned and mentioned that he had some news for him. He pulled out an envelope and revealed that a visitor had come from the royal capital. Raedrol paused, lost in thought for a moment. Concerned, Zaphis asked if he was all right or if he needed help, but Raedrol refused, saying he would go himself. After a brief silence, Raedrol suggested that once he was done with his business, Zaphis should accompany him for a while. As Raedrol prepared to leave, he waved back at Zaphis, saying he'd like to have a bout with him again, just like the old days. If it wasn't Zaphis, there wouldn't be a real challenge. Zaphis waved in return, shouting for him to just go, calling him a little brat. The scene shifted to Raedrol entering a room to meet a visitor. He asked about the guest, and the receptionist informed him that they were waiting in the reception room. Doubt flickered across his mind. What could they possibly want now? He guessed it might be Basil or Lockwood. Entering the room, he apologized for the wait and asked directly what their purpose was. A girl sat there, calmly sipping tea. She spoke first, saying it had been a long time. It was Martina Marcel. Raedrol's expression stiffened. His tone was far from warm. He sat down and muttered that it had been 5 years and asked since when she started addressing him as Prince. Martina delivered the news that just the other day Majesty, the king and Raedrol's father, had passed away. The words struck him heavily. He asked about his brother, and Martina replied that Granard, now the new king, had sent a royal decree. The air turned tense. The decree stated that Raedrol Zane, the king's brother, must immediately resign from his position as lord of the pioneer town and return to the royal capital at once. Raedrol gave a sharp smirk. Back to the royal capital? He asked if she had already forgotten what she had done. Martina remained composed, explaining that the kingdom was now on the brink of a great crisis. The Eastern Arslanian Empire, the most powerful nation on the central continent and the world's strongest power, had declared war on the kingdom of Zane. Raedrol's voice was calm, questioning if this so-called declaration of war wasn't just another show of strength. Martina clarified that while the empire was indeed powerful, it also had many enemies, but if left unchecked, even the Holy Sword couldn't protect them. That caught Raedrol's attention. She explained that the 12 Holy Swords, relics of ancient lore, still existed, and the Empire possessed 3 of them, each with a confirmed wielder known as a Holy Sword holder. It was extremely rare to have 4 wielders of Holy Swords in the same era, and Raedrol was one of them. She then handed him the royal decree commanding him to return to the capital and fight for the kingdom. Raedrol's patience snapped. He slammed his hand on the table, warning her not to make a mockery of him. The others in the room flinched in fear. He glared at Martina, demanding she answer truthfully. Did she really want him to fight for them? To risk his life for her? For the very people who had exiled him from the royal capital? Martina quietly admitted that he was right. Furious, Raedrol drew his sword and pointed it toward her chest. Martina tried to calm him, insisting this was for his own good. But Raedrol wanted a proper explanation, while he was still holding back his rage. Martina spoke again, her tone steady. She explained that if Raedrol were to stand on the battlefield as a holy sword holder, Granard would grant him any wish he desired, new territories beyond this remote land, and even the restoration of his royal status. Raedrol scoffed. Reclaiming my royal status, is that it? He muttered. If that's all you came to say, then leave. Raedrol's composure cracked slightly as he taunted her, saying she had grown arrogant that she now insulted people's lands by calling them this remote region. She asked sharply if he was defying a royal decree. Raedrol cut her off, snapping that she talked too much. Martina sighed, taking out a shining pearl. She spoke coldly, saying that if things had come to this, she was left with no choice. Suddenly, chains snapped onto Raedrol's wrists and locked him in handcuffs. Raedrol understood immediately. This had been her intention all along. Martina hadn't wanted things to come to this if she could avoid it, but she was the daughter of the Prime Minister. If the kingdom demanded sacrifice, she was obliged to give up everything. Raedrol scoffed. She had said the same thing before. Martina insisted that all of this was for the future of the kingdom of Zane, and that he must come with them. Raedrol suspected she expected him to comply without resistance. Martina admitted in a low voice that in the worst case she feared she might have to use slavery magic. Raedrol roared in disbelief at the mention of slavery magic. It had come to this. He was being treated like a criminal, and he couldn't comprehend how she could even consider such a thing. As a former vassal and once his fiancée, she begged him to come quietly and obey. He confessed he had been weak and foolish back then, believing that behaving properly could protect him from absurdity. Raedrol, however, was stubborn. He would never yield to them again. He aggressively shouted Neimilia's name. Raedrol comrade and Neimilia understood the assignment. The situation escalated unexpectedly. A soldier was wounded. Martina struck with her arrows, but Neimilia resisted. Anger flashed across Martina's face. Neimilia moved to check on her master, holding him carefully. Raedrol thanked her, but Martina's mind was racing. Magic, those golden eyes. There could be no doubt. Neimilia had been buried 200 years ago. How could she be here now? Martina realized with mounting shock that Neimilia must be one of the 6 witches of doom. Neimilia declared bluntly that only she could do as she wished with her master. She did not recall granting permission to a broad-shouldered woman to touch him freely. Neimilia shot back that, at this level of force, the handcuffs were inadequate for a proper restraint. If they were going to do this, they might as well do it properly. Raedrol slammed Neimilia's head and hissed for her to shut up. He warned Martina that she had tried to restrain him despite his royal blood. Now that her plan had failed, he'd hoped she was prepared for the consequences. Martina, shaken, admitted she had not expected him to have a legendary witch at his side. Raedril pressed a question. Was it Granard who ordered him seized and brought to the royal capital? Martina answered no. Neither His Majesty nor her father were involved. It was her fault. She had acted hastily. Raedril sheathed anger into a single motion, drawing his sword and declaring he would leave it at that. For a moment it seemed he might kill her. Martina's guilt was visible as Raedril pulled back his blade, poised to strike. Then he stopped. Martina asked why he had held back. Raedril admitted that, although it would have been easy to kill her after everything, he had a question for her, and he was not going to kill her yet. Martina replied that there was nothing she could tell him that would help. Raedril already knew that. Neimilia stepped forward. She gripped Martina tightly and, with a resolute expression, praised the willingness to sacrifice that shone on Martina's face, calling it almost lovely. Martina stood exposed and trembling. Neimilia warned that mere exposure would not save her. Martina was distraught, bewildered by what was happening. Neimilia said she could endure pain, but what about pleasure? The things Martina had built her pride on would dissolve into something else. The idea made Martina tingle with fear. Neimilia understood Martina well enough to know that she was not the kind of woman to break under ordinary questioning or torture. Martina looked both pained and terrified. Neimilia suggested they put it to the test, to see how far Martina could endure. Suddenly, a soldier watched in alarm. He demanded to know what Neimilia had done. He turned to Raedril and asked what he had done to Martina. Raedril shouted that this woman had unleashed a curse upon him, a royal, and had tried to restrain him by force. For the crime of high treason, she was now placed in their custody. The soldier recoiled. Raedril continued, voice breaking with bitter memory. On that day he had been devastated by betrayal. Everything he believed in was taken from him, and he had been cast out. And now they wanted to rob him again, strip away the small, normal life he had finally found. They would not. He vowed mercy would not be given. He was no longer the man he had been. If they trampled on his pride again, there would be consequences. Raedril ordered the soldiers to tell his brother that, as for the war with the Arslanian Empire, he would finish it himself. Outside the village, where countless soldiers stood in formation, it had only been 3 days since the kingdom had sent their reply. Such an eager response, Raedril thought. Judging by the sight, there must have been nearly 1,000 men. Among them, a man stepped forward and introduced himself as Darren Gallist, commander of the royal army. He requested that the gate be opened, but before the guards could act, Raedril halted them. After a moment the gate creaked open. Watching the scene, Zaphis wondered aloud if this was how royalty was usually welcomed. Even so, the supposed commander before them looked far too young, almost like a brat playing soldier. Raedril observed that he hadn't expected the commander to appear in person. It seemed the kingdom hadn't even had time to prepare appearances. Martina quietly remarked that perhaps this showed just how desperate their country had become. When Martina called out to Raedril, he turned to her. She insisted that the only way left to resist the Empire was to rely on him. Her words made Raedril tense with anger. He demanded to know who had given her permission to speak, reminding her that he certainly hadn't. Turning sharply, Raedril seized Martina by the face, ordering her to stay silent. He couldn't understand why she found it so hard to do something as simple as keeping still. Martina trembled, insisting it was all for the sake of the kingdom. Yet even that brief exchange seemed to trigger Neimilia's curse, filling Martina's body with an unbearable sensation of pleasure. In a moment of control lost, Raedril's hand moved to her chest. She had always been a chaste woman, and because of that, the line between pleasure and reason blurred dangerously in her mind. A cry escaped her lips, but in Raedril's mind, no one had told her to go this far. Just then, Zaphis announced that the commander had arrived. The atmosphere grew tense as Darren approached, his face carrying the weight of duty. Raedril studied him closely, doubtful of anyone serving under his brother. He reminded himself that this man is the son of General Delust. Still, he resolved that if Darren showed the slightest hostility, there would be no mercy. Composing himself, Raedril welcomed the commander, thanking him for coming all the way to meet them. Darren bowed deeply, addressing him as His Highness and remarking that it had been a long time. The gesture moved Raedril slightly. He told him to raise his head, recognizing him as the son of General Delust. Darren confirmed that they had once met at the royal palace alongside his father and expressed relief to see Raedril in good health. Raedril noted that this one seemed far more obedient, a different kind of man than he was used to. Neimilia found herself thinking that Darren was unexpectedly cute. With the greetings done, Raedril brought the conversation back to business. Darren then stated his purpose. He had been sent with a message from the royal subordinates. His Highness Raedrol will participate in the upcoming war. That was why he had come, to accompany him back and humbly request that he save the kingdom. Raedrol assured Darren that there was no need to worry. A ruler, he believed, must always keep his promises, for the subjects looked up to their king. It was a duty of royalty to respond to the loyalty of the people, a lesson passed down from his late father. Holding those words close, Raedrol silently vowed to do everything within his power to protect the kingdom. Darren admired his determination and remarked that such resolve was truly worthy of respect. He then suggested that they begin their preparations immediately. As Darren's gaze drifted, he noticed Martina standing nearby. Raedrol caught the look and asked if something was wrong. Darren quickly denied it, though in his mind he thought that after Martina's previous abusive behavior toward Raedrol, the punishment she had received could almost be considered merciful. Raedrol noticed the tension and told Darren not to make that expression. The woman still had her uses, he said. There was no reason to treat her harshly. Meanwhile, Neimilia quietly thought that the commander was completely misunderstanding the situation. Realizing he had spoken too much, Raedrol shifted focus back to their mission. Preparations were complete, and it was time to depart for the royal capital. Darren asked if Martina would be accompanying them, but Raedrol refused. She would remain there, as she would be of no use on this journey. The scene then shifted to the carriage grounds. Raedrol informed Zaphis that he was leaving, and Zaphis instructed him to finish his work quickly and return home soon. Raedrol apologized for troubling him, mentioning that he would be leaving the town and Martina in his hands. Martina stood silently, her expression distant and broken. Raedrol climbed into the carriage as Zaphis assured him that everything would be handled. During the ride, Darren hesitantly asked if it was wise to travel without any additional company. Raedrol brushed off the concern, saying there was no issue. Someone had to remain behind to manage the city. Even so, Darren seemed uneasy. Neimilia, eager and cheerful, introduced herself as the one responsible for taking care of her master. She said she looked forward to working alongside Darren. In return, Darren politely asked that if His Highness had any requests, he would inform him immediately. Raedrol smirked at the formal tone, remarking that Darren was now finally treating him like royalty. Darren affirmed it proudly, declaring that Raedrol was a noble of royal blood after all. The mention of royal blood made Raedrol's expression harden. His tone turned sharp as he asked whether Darren would still say the same thing if he and his brother were ever to fight. The question left Darren pale and speechless. He nervously begged His Highness not to jest about such matters. Even in passing, such words carried heavy meaning. Raedrol leaned back, saying he was merely venting. He admitted that it felt ironic. After being cast aside as an unneeded prince, he was now being summoned again purely for their convenience. It made him wonder what they were really thinking. Darren was left uncertain how to respond, while Raedrol dismissed the topic lightly, saying he was only joking. After a pause, Darren said that if he might be so bold, he wished to convey a message. His Majesty Grenard truly desired reconciliation. The king wanted to stand hand in hand with Raedrol to fight against the Empire. He asked that Raedrol consider His Majesty's feelings. Raedrol, murmuring about his brother's feelings, he then turned toward Neimilia and gave a subtle nod. Understanding immediately, Neimilia prepared a steaming glass of milk and offered it to Darren. Darren, confused. As Neimilia began to explain, Raedrol interrupted her midway. Before Darren could respond, his eyes widened in shock. The realization hit him. The woman before him was a magician. Astonishment filled Darren's face. Magic without chanting was nearly unheard of. He now understood why Raedrol had brought only a maid with him. At first, he had wondered if there was some hidden plan, but after witnessing that display, it all made sense. Such overwhelming power was clearly a silent warning, a reminder not to act foolishly. Raedrol, however, found Darren's interpretation amusing. To him, it was nothing more than a casual moment. All he had wanted was some tea and took a sip of glass. He complimented Neimilia, saying the tea she brewed was as delicious as always. Neimilia, flustered, insisted that she didn't deserve such kind words. She had simply used a bit of special honey this time. The moment she said it, Raedrol nearly choked and spat out the tea, realizing what she had done. Regretting his compliment, he demanded to know what on earth she had put in it. And so the carriage rolled onward. The road stretched ahead as Raedrol sank into thought, staring quietly out the window. After 5 long years away, he was finally returning to the royal capital. This was going to be one wild homecoming. At the royal capital, Raedrol and his companions have finally arrived. Neimilia admires the towering wall before them, calling it an impressive sight. Raedrol, however, wonders aloud if it's really worth such praise. Neimilia muses that a grand and dignified king must have once ruled this place. Together, they stand before the massive gate. As they enter the town, the bustling market comes into view. For Raedrol, it stirs old memories, yet, compared to the past, he notices how faded everything feels. The war has taken its toll, and he wonders if the people, too, can sense that heavy atmosphere. Darren's voice pulls him from his thoughts. Darren informs him that the audience with His Majesty will take place tomorrow. A mansion has been prepared for his stay, and he is advised to rest and recover from the journey. Raedrol seems puzzled. Why a mansion and not the royal palace? Darren has no answer. Raedrol smirks, suspecting that his brother must truly resent him. He feels that much trust has been lost. Darren quickly insists that such a thing could never be true. Raedrol calms him, saying there's no need to cover for his brother. He has known for 5 years that Granard has harbored resentment ever since the matter of the Holy Sword. Darren looks embarrassed, and silence falls between them as the carriage continues forward. At last they arrive. The scene shifts to a grand mansion. Neimilia's eyes brighten with excitement, while Raedrol looks on in quiet amusement. Darren instructs them to use the mansion freely during their stay in the capital. Raedrol sees through the arrangement. His brother's intentions are clear. He realizes that Granard doesn't want him inside the palace but still wishes to exploit his strength. To keep him cooperative, he won't hesitate to dangle a tempting reward before him. Later, Raedrol strolls through the mansion halls. Neimilia comments that it feels quite different from their home in the frontier city. Raedrol admits he dislikes the motive behind it, but the mansion itself is innocent. He decides they should make themselves comfortable for the time being. As they step into the grand hall, all the maids bow deeply, addressing Raedrol as the younger brother of His Majesty. He finds it irritating, while Neimilia watches in quiet surprise. A butler approaches and greets him respectfully, noting how long it has been since they last met. He, too, refers to Raedrol as the younger brother of His Majesty. Raedrol studies the man's face. It looks familiar. The man introduces himself as Sarowyn, a servant in the service of King Granard. At that moment, Raedrol recalls seeing him once before, perhaps at a tea party where Sarowyn had offered him sweets. Sarowyn bows deeply, expressing that it is an honor to meet him again. His Majesty has instructed them to serve Raedrol and assures him they will fulfill any request without hesitation. Raedrol finds the timing perfect. With everyone present, he decides to speak. He gathers the servants and announces that he has something important to discuss. Calmly yet firmly, he declares that all of them are dismissed and must leave the mansion immediately. The servants are thrown into panic. Sarowyn, shocked, asks if they had done something wrong, why he would say such a thing. Raedrol answers coldly that it isn't about right or wrong. He simply doesn't need them. Sarowyn's expression hardens as anger begins to rise. Sarowyn remarks that the mansion is far too large to be managed by just one maid. Pointing toward Neimilia, he questions what a little girl like her could possibly handle on her own. Raedrol calmly replies that it isn't something he needs to worry about. Neimilia, clearly offended, retorts with irritation, but Raedrol cuts her off, stating firmly that the only person he trusts is her, no one else, and certainly not any of his brother's agents. Sarowyn's expression hardens with anger and frustration. He declares that if that is the case, he will personally report this matter to His Majesty Granard. Raedrol simply tells him to do as he pleases. Once the servants leave, silence fills the grand hall. Finally alone, Raedrol exhales in relief, appreciating the brief moment of peace. But when he looks at Neimilia's face, he notices her beaming expression and asks what that look is about. Neimilia, smiling brightly, repeats his earlier words, how he said she was the only one he trusted. Raedrol quickly clarifies that it was just a figure of speech. Neimilia, refusing to let go, teases that she wouldn't let anyone, neither god nor demon, disturb their time together. Raedrol, unimpressed, mutters that she must have eaten something strange and decides she might need a doctor. Neimilia raises her voice, insisting there is no need for him to hide his embarrassment. She proclaims herself the unworthy Neimilia, ready to receive his love and devotion now that the intruders are gone. Embarrassed and frustrated, Raedrol grabs her by the face, asking if she is satisfied with her nonsense now. Neimilia yelps that it hurts. Raedrol orders her to inspect the mansion, and she immediately complies. Neimilia activates her magic and gathers the servants, commanding them to search every corner of the mansion. She instructs them to ensure there is nothing dangerous hidden inside and that no one is secretly lurking within. The servants nod in understanding and hurry to carry out her orders. Once the inspection begins, Neimilia assures Raedrol that he can rest without worry and leave everything concerning the mansion to her. Raedrol responds that he's counting on her. Neimilia adds that if he finds himself unable to sleep, he may call for her anytime. She will gladly devote her body and soul to comforting him. Raedrol grows visibly agitated and walks away before she can say more. The next morning, Raedrol heads to the royal palace. Raedrol and Grenard stood facing each other in silence. Raedrol bowed deeply and introduced himself, stating that by royal command he had come before His Highness. Grenard calmly instructed him to raise his head, thanking him for coming. Raedrol acknowledged that it had indeed been a long time. Grenard urged him not to be so formal, reminding him that they were the only brothers and that he should address him as he used to. Reluctantly, Raedrol responded, calling him elder brother, his tone carrying a mix of nostalgia and unease. With sincere regret, Raedrol apologized for being unable to attend their father's funeral, asking forgiveness for being an incompetent younger brother. Grenard reassured him that it was all right, praising him for fulfilling the great duty of keeping the frontier safe from monsters. Raedrol, however, found the words hollow. Deep inside, he thought how shameless Grenard had become. Inwardly, he reflected that the man had gained enough composure to play the king's role well, alongside Chancellor Lockwood, who remained unnervingly calm even after his own daughter, Martina, was taken prisoner. His gaze shifted, recalling the past. General Garst was nowhere to be seen, but the two who had banished him back then were standing right before him. The moment felt eerily similar to that day, the same oppressive air, the same judging eyes still trapped by the aura of the Holy Sword. Those were the very eyes that had abandoned him. Raedrol recognized them well, the eyes of a petty king who had exiled his own brother out of jealousy. In that moment he finally understood. Grenard had chosen the Holy Sword over his own blood, and now that same brother dared to summon him again for his own use. The anger within Raedrol simmered. Forgiveness was far beyond reach. Suppressing his bitterness, Raedrol asked why he had been summoned back to the royal capital. Grenard replied that he already knew the reason. He explained that the Arsline Empire from the eastern lands had invaded their kingdom Zane. Their armies, strengthened by a holy sword-bearer, had already conquered 1/3 of the territory. Though General Garst was holding back the enemy for now, it was only a matter of time before they fell. Raedrol questioned what Grenard expected him to do. Inwardly, he saw this as their final turning point. All he had ever wanted was a single word of apology, something simple, something human. But if even that could not be given, then perhaps they truly were beyond reconciliation. Suddenly Grenard gave his command. The Excalibur holder, the holy sword-bearer, was to take up Danleaf and fight the Empire to save the kingdom of Zane. Raedrol froze, disbelief written across his face. In his heart, he knew Grenard no longer saw him as a brother, only as a pawn to be used when convenient. A cold resolve settled within him. If that was how it was going to be, then he would not hold back either. He would reclaim everything that had been stolen from him and destroy anyone who stood in his way. The one destined to rule would not be Grenard. It would be Raedrol. Raedrol calmly announced that he was afraid he would have to decline. He could not, under any circumstance, fight against the Empire. The words struck the hall like a thunderclap. Grenard froze in disbelief, while the ministers and nobles around them grew tense and restless. Murmurs spread. Defying a royal command was nothing short of treason. Even if he was the king's younger brother, such insolence was unforgivable. Grenard's voice trembled with anger and confusion as he questioned whether Raedrol even understood what he was saying. This was the king's direct command. Yet Raedrol stood firm, his expression unshaken. Chancellor Lockwood stepped forward, warning that such defiance was deeply disrespectful to His Majesty. Raedrol acknowledged the remark calmly, admitting that perhaps it was. But as the lord of a frontier city, he was duty-bound to defend his people and keep the monsters at bay. To abandon that duty and fight the Empire instead, wasn't that an unreasonable demand? Lockwood shouted that this was a national crisis, asking whether Raedrol even understood the meaning of priorities. Raedrol cut in sharply, repeating the word priorities. His tone turned colder as he continued. If priorities were truly what mattered, then where were the reinforcements besides himself? He demanded to know if any other lords had come forward to assist. He had heard only the army and the knights were facing the Empire. How peculiar, when so many nobles stood present. How many troops had each of them contributed? Surely, the king did not intend to send only him to war while the rest watched safely from their palaces. His words silenced the room. A few faces twisted with discomfort. Grenard finally asked what it was Raedrol truly wanted. If he absolutely refused to join the battle, then there was no reason for him to remain in the capital. Did he seek money? Power? Status? If there was something he desired, he should speak plainly. Raedrol smiled faintly. As expected of His Majesty, the king's understanding was quick, and it truly made things easier. He praised Granard's gift for reading people's hearts. Granard, growing irritated, reminded him that he had asked for his demands, not empty flattery. He reached into his robe and drew out a scroll, remarking that so these were his demands, a small favor perhaps from a poor brother driven from his homeland. He declared that if that was the case, then he would state his conditions clearly. The hall settled as Raedrol Zane announced himself and laid out the terms under which he would fight. He stated that he would protect the Zane kingdom from the Arslan Empire only if certain conditions were accepted. First, he required a guarantee of safety within the kingdom, explicitly that King Granard would guarantee Raedrol's safety. Next, he demanded that the royal palace provide 100,000 gold coins in aid for the frontier city under his governance. At this, the courtiers turned in alarm, their surprise spreading through the chamber. As the scene unfolded, he continued with a third point. Any property he obtained in the war would belong solely to him, with no right of surrender claimed by the royal palace. Officials traded worried whispers that such terms would strain the national budget. Lockwood pressed him for clarification, demanding what he meant. Raedrol answered with the fourth condition, asserting the right to decide the disposition of any prisoners captured during the war. During this time, Lockwood judged the list to be a string of so-called rightful claims and thought that, if compensation was the goal, Raedrol should state it plainly. He also wondered what His Highness could possibly be thinking as the demands grew. Raedrol then said there was one final condition. He declared the fifth condition plainly. King Granard was to appoint his younger brother, Raedrol, as crown prince and designate him the next ruler of the kingdom. In the distance, a minister and a knight reacted in shock, their outcry breaking the room's composure. Lockwood responded at once. He rejected the proposal as absurd and challenged whether Raedrol understood the weight of his words. As the pressure rose, he condemned the manner of address toward the king, arguing that the demand sounded as if Raedrol intended to depose the monarch and seize the throne for himself. Granard studied him and asked if he truly meant it. Then, with rising force, he rejected the idea outright. He stated that the crown prince had already been decided and that the next king would be his son Strauss. He added that he would never appoint someone like Raedrol as crown prince. Raedrol acknowledged the reaction with calm brevity. He said he would withdraw the final condition. At that, Granard stiffened, caught off guard. Raedrol clarified that he was indeed retracting the last demand he had placed on his brother. With the tension easing, Raedrol concluded that there was no longer any obstacle. He urged Granard to sign the oath at once. Meanwhile, Granard pieced together the tactic. He realized that Raedrol had floated an unreasonable demand only to make the remaining terms easier to accept. If he refused those terms now, his fitness as king could come under scrutiny. He also recognized the kingdom's fragile unity and understood that a show of weakness might drive some factions toward the empire. As his thoughts settled, he admitted to himself the thoroughness of the approach, though he still wondered what Raedrol intended with the other four conditions. He then said he would have the royal seal brought and asked for a moment. Raedrol declined the need for a seal and, addressing his brotherly bond, proposed they mark the pact in blood. Granard repeated the phrase to himself, questioning the notion of a blood mark. Raedrol turned the moment toward purpose and stated that they now had to stand against the Empire's invasion. Granard, weighing the proposal, aligned himself with the idea of a bond proven by blood and accepted the notion of brothers sealing their trust with a blood pact. With a curt allowance to proceed, he let the matter advance, and the two prepared to formalize the pact. Soon after, Granard checked Raedrol's intent and made clear that, having come this far, he would not allow defeat against the Empire. Raedrol affirmed without hesitation and brought the agreement to its conclusion. As the pact took hold, he activated the contract. His aura spread through the hall, and the energy drawn from within him flowed into Granard. In the next instant, Granard staggered, gasping as the force ran its course. Raedrol stated that the contract was sealed and cautioned his brother to be ready. In the quiet that followed, he conveyed that his fangs would bite deep. As the tension peaked, Granard called for the guards to seize Raedrol. The squad rushed in, but in the next heartbeat Raedrol had already brought them all down, moving so fast that the clash ended before the hall could catch its breath. During the uneasy silence that followed, he looked over the fallen men and remarked that the royal guards protecting the king were far too weak. He added, with cool certainty, that it was no surprise the nation stood on the brink of ruin. Granard, shaken, demanded to know what had been done to him. Raedrol answered plainly that he had only formed a contract, Lockwood rejected the claim as nonsense and ordered every unit to seize Rhaedirel. Rhaedirel met the command without flinching, inviting them to try if they believed they could. He warned that if they forced the issue, they should be prepared to lose their lord. Even then, Lockwood urged his side to ignore the warning and use force if necessary. As the stir rose again, Rhaedirel restated the first condition, the one that required King Grenard to guarantee Rhaedirel's safety within the kingdom of Zane. Lockwood recognized the oath from earlier and, in a sudden realization, faltered. Rhaedirel told him there was no need to repeat anything. The contract had already been sealed, and cautioned that defiance would bring consequences they understood all too well. Grenard pieced together the implication and concluded that Rhaedirel had bound him with a curse of contract. Rhaedirel confirmed the nature of it, noting that it applied to both of them. Grenard described the curse as one meant to forcibly enslave sinners, and accused him of daring to use it upon the king. Nearby, Lockwood judged that reckless resistance would be dangerous and thought that Rhaedirel might truly kill the king if pushed. Rhaedirel accepted the label in part, acknowledging that being called the sinner was not entirely wrong for him. Grenard urged him to keep his temper. Even so, Grenard warned that Rhaedirel did not understand the weight of his action. He asserted that a curse of this level would be dispelled once the court magicians gathered, and that when it was over, only Rhaedirel's sin would remain. Rhaedirel answered that perhaps that would happen, yet without this step he could not bring himself to trust his brother. Rhaedirel pressed the point and reminded Grenard that he knew exactly what was being implied. Grenard answered with cold certainty that, had Rhaedirel simply obeyed, he would have allowed him to live despite considering him an eyesore. He suggested that Rhaedirel had grown overconfident after becoming a holy sword wielder and challenged whether Rhaedirel truly believed he had surpassed the king himself. Rhaedirel met the provocation without elaboration. He left the question unanswered and stated that he owed no explanation. Grenard then conceded to the terms of the contract. He declared that Rhaedirel could do as he wished with what had been taken from the Empire, and that the aid money for the frontier city would also be granted. Even so, Grenard vowed that he would never forgive the curse. He warned that once the Empire was driven back, a fitting punishment would follow. Rhaedirel, steadying himself, noted his own scar and told himself he needed to get his act together. Then, with composed assurance, he said the war against the Empire would proceed smoothly. As the moment settled, he voiced his resolve to save the country. The onlookers stood stunned as he walked out, his determination unshaken. Behind him, Grenard insisted that banishing him to the frontier had not been a mistake. He recalled the first king, also a bearer of Danleaf, and the precedent set in the founding of the nation. Rhaedirel understood the reference. He recalled that the first king had killed his own brother to establish the realm. At the corridor's edge, Daeron hurried after him and called for him to stop. Daeron caught up and demanded to know why Rhaedirel had gone that far. Rhaedirel answered that trust could not be built on words alone. Daeron, anxious, pointed out that once the curse was lifted, punishment could be severe. He pleaded for an apology to His Majesty. Rhaedirel recognized Daeron as General Garst's son and remarked on the concern, acknowledging the kindness. Daeron admitted that his father had been among those involved in Rhaedirel's exile. Daeron hurried alongside and tried to bridge the past, explaining that the exile had only been out of concern for the country's future and not from any personal grudge. He added that his father lamented how matters had unfolded this time. As they moved through the corridor, he asked where Rhaedirel was headed and pointed out that the castle gate lay in the other direction. Realization dawned as he named the destination, the Hall of the Holy Sword. At the entrance, the guards stiffened at the sight of the king's brother with Captain Daeron. Even so, they refused to open the door without Grenard's permission. Rhaedirel did not wait. He snatched the key, kicked the guard aside, and advanced. Another guard lunged, but black flames erupted, and the man screamed as the magic consumed him. Pleas for a halt followed, yet Rhaedirel pushed the door and went inside. The grand doors creaked open, and dark mist spilled into the corridor as he stepped forward. He reflected that he had not entered this place since the ritual of succession. Now he was returning. Almost at once, the cursed winds took hold of Daeron at the threshold. Rhaedirel explained in a low, steady voice that the wind drained strength, and that forcing one's way closer would only bring weakness and death. Then he walked on, unhurried, through the pressure of the curse toward the altar. Before him stood the shape of his unfulfilled desire, the holy sword Danleaf. As his hand closed around the hilt, the blade flared with fierce light. He sensed its eager welcome, as if the sword were glad to meet him again, and he answered that anticipation with quiet resolve, promising it would not be left to idleness. He gathered himself, set his stance, and moved to act. He invoked the holy sword and reclaimed it. Then, with purpose sharpening his gaze, he declared the course ahead. He and the blade would show them the path of conquest they would walk. Raidorol returned to his mansion, where Neimilia greeted him quietly and acknowledged that he had reclaimed the holy sword, Danleaf. She recognized it as the sword once tied to another person, and when Raidorol gently probed whether it interested her, she answered that it did not. As the scene settled, Raidorol considered his next step and wondered what he should do with the holy sword now in his care. Meanwhile, Neimilia reflected in silence. She understood that everything had begun with that very blade. She then spoke of the calamity demon known as the 6 Witches of Ruin and explained that she was the youngest daughter among them. 200 years earlier, together with her mother and sisters, she had brought down countless nations. During this time, she recalled how, as a witch who governed darkness, she had once believed such destruction to be natural. Yet in that turmoil, she experienced her first love. The one she loved had been an enemy, the bearer chosen by the miraculous holy sword. Yet before the force of that feeling, the old order had lost its meaning. For his sake, she had taken up arms and even turned against her own family. In the flow of these memories, she thought of how it would end and felt that, at last, her heart would be fulfilled. With that thought, Neimilia drifted into her old memories. As Neimilia's memory opened, she found herself suspended in chains against a cold stone wall, her body exposed and her strength fading. Time felt uncertain. She could no longer tell how long she had been there, and her thoughts drifted into confusion. The ache in her limbs spread into a quiet loneliness, and she wished for someone, anyone, to help. Just then, the door swung open and Raidorol stepped inside. He had shaken off a pursuing monster and decided to hide here for a while. As he caught his breath, his eyes fell on Neimilia. Shock ran through him, and for an instant he wondered if she were a ghost. He turned to flee, but her plea to stop held him in place. He wavered, uneasy about remaining near a crazy woman, yet the danger outside pressed in. Neimilia pointed out that monsters still roamed beyond the door. He glanced back, uncertain, and agreed only to stay briefly. She brightened at his concession, and, with mischievous cheer, offered a teasing reward, referring to her watermelon. He still questioned whether he should leave after all, but the moment passed as the two settled into a fragile truce. After a pause, Neimilia began to explain. She said that was why she had been sealed in this place. Raidorol, still processing, acknowledged that witches like her had existed 200 years ago, yet the reality unsettled him. He realized the legendary holy sword truly existed and wondered if such things could really happen. Watching him, Neimilia thought of him as a straightforward child. Raidorol then asked why the hero, the one she had fought alongside, had done this to her. Her gaze drifted inward. In those distant memories, she saw herself laying waste to her beloved's homeland, along with other tragedies that had followed. When he pressed, she denied further explanation, saying there was nothing to add, and redirected the talk by saying she wanted to hear about him instead. Raidorol answered in a measured way. There was little worth telling, he said. For reasons he did not fully understand, the holy sword had chosen him, and because of that, his own brother had driven him out of the kingdom. In that sense, he felt a resemblance between them. Even if he were betrayed, even if his heart fractured, he would keep struggling simply to survive. Neimilia listened closely and urged him to continue. He realized he had not introduced himself and corrected the oversight. He told her his name was Raidorol. Neimilia stared at Raidorol and, in his eyes, saw the echo of the man she had loved 2 centuries ago. He noticed her change in expression and briefly wondered if he had said something odd, but she brushed it aside and denied that anything was wrong. As the moment lingered, he blamed the gloom on this sealed place and decided to pull her out of it. He did not care what kind of binding held her. He broke the restraints, and the shackles snapped. She dropped to her knees, chains still hanging from her wrists. Soon after, he handed her clothes and told her to dress. Since the decision was made, he urged her to hurry back with him. She accepted with a quiet understanding. Inwardly, she resolved to live for him from now on. She vowed to protect him and to follow him, believing that their meeting here had been fate. With that thought steadying her, she prepared to leave at his side, even with monsters outside the ruin. A moment later, he led the way and told her it was time to go. Back in the present, Raidorol noticed her distant look and asked what was wrong. She took his earlier words as harsh, and, carried by emotion, declared that she would devote herself to him each night until he understood her completely. He conceded fault to calm the air, then pointed to the floor and asked about the object lying there. Neimilia explained plainly. An intruder had broken into the mansion, so she had disposed of him. She had questioned him quickly, and learned that she had been the target. Raidorol tried to understand the purpose. She added that the man had mentioned taking someone alive. Raidorol concluded that the plan involved a hostage. He noted that the analysis of his brother's curse should not even be finished yet, which meant the enemy was moving faster than expected. Even so, he admitted a blind spot. From a distance, Neimilia truly appeared to be a frail girl. She pushed back, insisting she was a delicate and lovely maid in her own right. He acknowledged that she was certainly excellent at her duties. She then hinted that an excellent maid deserved a reward and brought up matters they had been neglecting. He put that aside, saying the situation would be much better without this problem, and focused on defense. At this rate, the mansion would need its own security. Since he was responsible for guarding the border, he could not rely on the settlers of the frontier city. He needed to increase the number of people on his side. Finally, he fixed on a clear objective. They needed an overwhelming achievement. There was only one decisive target. They would bring down the enemy's holy sword-bearer. At the Zane Kingdom's royal capital, the day after the meeting, Rhaedirol prepared to depart without delay. He felt his master's demands pressing on him, yet he accepted the pace. Meanwhile, Darren reminded him that time mattered now more than ever. With that urgency set, Rhaedirol set off and signaled the start. He headed straight for the Brain Fortress. As the scene shifted to the fortress front, the defenders faced a single opponent who still forced them to tighten their line. They moved to encircle and tried to hold their ground by appealing to the pride of the kingdom. During this time, at the Zine Kingdom's Brain Fortress itself, steel rang and dust rose. The intruder, known as the Holy Sword-Bearer, split the front in a single flash. Soldiers stumbled and cries followed. Moments later, a retreat was called. Inside the operation command room of the Brain Fortress, tension ran high. Officers reported new casualties and argued for an immediate offensive. They worried that morale would soon give way. Even so, General Garst chose restraint. He ordered them to endure for now, convinced that their chance would come once Prince Rhaedirol reached the field. Out on the lines, the name behind the onslaught became clear. The enemy was the Arslan Empire's holy sword-bearer. As this recognition spread, the pressure on the fortress grew. Elsewhere, within the Arslan Empire's camp, General Grakos watched the siege develop. He acknowledged the fortress as a hard target and noted how stubbornly the enemy resisted. Colonel Dallas stood with him and read the situation much the same way. In his view, the last defenders of the Zane Kingdom had grown desperate inside those walls, and that very desperation kept the fight alive. Dallas weighed the situation with care. In his view, once the Brain Fortress fell, the kingdom would be left practically defenseless, so he favored advancing slowly and striking with precision. Grakos considered how quickly the war had shifted. Only 2 months had passed since the front opened, yet the pace already exceeded his expectations. Dallas recalled the invasion 10 years earlier, when the Empire had struggled to counter the kingdom's home field defenses. By contrast, Grakos now recognized how much easier things had become. He acknowledged that the Holy Sword's power inspired real fear. Dallas then traced the origin of the current campaign to a single spark. 3 Holy Sword bearers had appeared in the Arslan Empire at the same time, and that coincidence set the invasion in motion. From there, Dallas affirmed the chain of decisions. The Emperor had seized the moment, choosing to pursue conquest across the continent. With a holy sword in play, a single warrior could turn the tide of a battle. He named one such figure, Her Imperial Highness Cilia von Arslan, chosen by the Holy Sword of Lightning, Claustris, despite being a member of the royal family. Lowering his scope, he watched as Cilia returned from the field and came down from the fight. Grakos remembered the most recent engagement and credited her with saving them then. Grakos praised her conduct, calling it a display like thunder. Dallas agreed and regarded her as a true hero. He tried to lift Grakos' spirits, acknowledging the feeling behind his concern. Grakos answered with a steady assurance. His Highness was straightforward and did not harbor ill will toward those who drew his emotions. Dallas stiffened at the remark and then admitted he understood, though some hesitation remained. At that moment, Cilia approached and asked what they were discussing. Dallas addressed her in surprise. Cilia reported that the day's decoy mission had ended, and she described it as dull, with little resistance. Grakos noted that she had returned earlier than expected. Dallas added that the 2 positions were too far apart, as if to explain the quick return. Cilia then turned to the matter of command. She accused them of holding yet another strategy meeting without her, and reminded them she had told them to convene when she was present. Grakos apologized and explained that Colonel Sapphirus felt uneasy around her, leaving them few options. Cilia claimed she had expected as much. She insisted the colonel needed to adapt, remarking that she had heard he disliked women, but stressed that they were comrades fighting on the same side. She warned that such an attitude would lead nowhere on the battlefield. Dallas closed the exchange with a formal apology. Cilia turned the conversation back to the colonel's habits, telling him to drop his aversion to women if he hoped to find a good partner. She added that, despite the sharpness in his eyes, his face was not bad, so he should try harder. Dallas recognized the pattern and bristled at her boldness. Gracchus, however, steered them away from the teasing and reminded them they had been discussing the war. He also made it clear that he wanted Celia's view. Dallas looked up in surprise, while Celia brightened and said she had hoped to speak with her grandpa as well. Gracchus welcomed that enthusiasm. Dallas, thinking of the commander he revered, recalled how an imperial soldier admired a fierce general. He remembered the pride he had felt when chosen as adjutant, and, with a sting of disappointment, saw the same general doting on his grandchild. Celia, still focused on the front, reported that she had gone out again that day and asked how they planned to take the fortress. Gracchus weighed the question through the wider battlefield. In his judgment, their advance remained constrained because the kingdom still benefited from the protection of General Basil Garst, a guardian figure to their enemies. Dallas backed that assessment with reports. The defenders possessed ample weapons and supplies, so a swift victory was unlikely. Celia acknowledged their strength and admitted she had underestimated them because they had not taken obvious action. Gracchus explained that if the enemy were so easily baited, the campaign would already be simpler. He advised Celia to widen her perspective. She pouted at the rebuke, then pressed with a challenge of her own, asking if the opposing commander surpassed Gracchus. Gracchus refused the comparison. In his mind, he stood far above, unwilling to yield to someone 2 decades younger. Celia cheered his confidence. Dallas returned to the larger picture and concluded that the so-called Guardian continued to block the Empire's path to supremacy. The battle would not close quickly. Celia paused only a moment before proposing a direct solution. She offered to bring back the target's head herself. Dallas and Gracchus stiffened at once. Celia continued anyway, stating that she could slip into the fortress alone and eliminate the person, which would secure their victory. Gracchus cut the idea off immediately and forbade it. Gracchus shut down the idea at once and brought up the last time she had rushed in alone. When she had charged into Vaughn's fortress by herself, he had nearly collapsed from fear. Celia replied that it had still turned out well because of her effort. He admitted the outcome had been fine, yet confessed that if anything had happened to her, it would have broken him. She looked to him with concern. He then asked for a promise. He wanted her to keep the vow she had made, to stop fighting so recklessly, and to spare him that worry. Dallas stepped forward to redirect the mood. He addressed Celia with formal respect and praised her recent performance as truly splendid. Even so, he explained that if she continued to take all the attention, the officers would have nowhere to stand. Many soldiers hoped to rise through merit, he added, and they would be grateful if she allowed them to take credit for this campaign. Celia considered it and agreed. Dallas assured her that when her strength was truly needed, they would call for her, and asked her to wait until then. He emphasized that he meant every word. Gracchus approved of the stance, calling it the attitude of someone fit to lead, one who cared for those under her. Celia answered with a small, exasperated murmur toward her grandfather, but she did not argue. Meanwhile, Raedorel traveled with his companions. He paused as a sudden sensation ran through him. His sword felt as if it were calling out. He recognized the pull, Danleaf. Darren noticed the shift and asked if something was wrong. Raedorel understood it as a sign that their enemy had begun to act in earnest. In that moment, the sense deepened into certainty. The power that rises from one's feelings carries the truth forward.